All right. Well, listen, thank you everybody for attending what is Elevar's webinar. The intention from today is that we talk about what may be holding your business back. And like a lot of the sessions that I run, I don't plan to make it all of me talking. I plan to have you all doing some work because I want you thinking about your own business or your own place of work. So what we're going to do is we're going to concentrate on your own business if you're the owner of a business, or we're going to look at the business that you happen to work in if you're a leader or a manager within a business. So a little bit about Elevar, the work that we do with clients across the island of Ireland, we've been doing for a good number of years. And the associates that I have within the organisation are all very experienced individuals within their own specialisms. And we use those specialisms within the businesses that we go into as and where we need that specialist skill. So let me move on. Bear with me as I play with technology. So, as I said, please have pen and paper ready, and we will be using that in a couple of slides where I will be getting you, as I said, to think about your own business. What I want you to do is to be absolutely honest when you're scoring. This score is for yourself. So no point trying to believe you're in a position or answering the question just to feel good about it. What we are trying to do is we will talk about the pillars of importance or alignment within a business, and what we will hopefully aim to achieve at a very high level is showing you where there may be some friction within those pillars within your business. So, of the organisations, of the companies that exist across the island of Ireland, there's quite a concerning statistic. And what we see is that third generation companies are declining to about 12%. So companies that are commencing first generation and moving to third generation, there's only 12% of those companies that are commencing making it to the third generation. Now, whilst I haven't put it in this slide, I wonder if you can think what the percentage would be that make it to the fourth generation. And that actually is as low as 3 to 4%. So the bit that I want people to understand is the challenges that businesses face. And what we want to try and get into is underneath the surface of that and understanding how we can make the businesses more resilient. And that's what we try to do with the work that we are carrying out within organizations. The simple truth is that hard work alone is not going to determine your success. And this is something that I have seen and experienced from my own upbringing in a household where my father ran his own businesses. Believe me, he did work very hard. And I went through my corporate career and I've come out and I've seen many, many businesses where the belief that hard work alone will drive efficiency and will drive effectiveness and will drive success. And that's not the case. What I want to try and talk to you today about and try to explain is that it's not necessarily hard work, but clever work that will make the difference. It's the alignment between the various and important pillars within the business that we're going to talk about that will make the difference. I've had first-hand experience in probably my last role in corporate where I was working in transport. And I had a number of directors at that time who really truly believed that rolling the sleeves up and getting stuck in and doing 16-hour days was what life was about. And that's what would make us successful. And honestly, it's not. And I see that time and time again where business owners, leaders are too taken over with the amount of work that needs to be done. And I'm not trying to belittle that. I run my own business as well. And so I do appreciate the amount of work and effort that is involved. But it's about working clever which is what I want to try and get across today. So, what do we see in the businesses that I've worked in? Well, there's a couple of areas I'm going to talk about. Firefighting is one that comes up. I've called this strategic deficit, but really it's about not having any plan. It's about dealing with what's on the table today, not thinking beyond the day. Maybe you get as far as the week, but too often we don't go beyond that. And so therefore our time and effort is consumed with what's right in front of us. The other issue that we come across is accountability, our ownership gaps. And this is where we find within businesses, people just aren't taking the responsibility. And again, the bit that I want to be clear on, and I talk to businesses about this, genuinely believe it, 99% of people do come into work looking to work hard and to have an impact in the business that they work in. When that goes adrift, it's when there's unclear guidance. But ultimately, it leads to what we talk about of accountability and ownership gaps. We find operational bottlenecks. This could be a manufacturing process. It could be an administration process. It could be a sales process. It could be any of the processes within our business. But time and time again, what surprises me is the amount of waste that exists within these processes within the business. And it ultimately is creating time delays. It's creating waste that's costing us money. Owner dependency. Again, some businesses have a challenge where too much effort relies on the owner. All the answers have to go through the owner. And therefore, this impacts again back on the accountability gaps. Teams, people within teams are not going to take ownership if the owner isn't prepared to delegate. So this is a two-way street, and we need to be working with the owner to make sure that the delegation takes place. And we need to be working with the teams to make sure that they take ownership of what's been delegated. And finally, financial erosion. And this is where we don't have the financial insight that we should have within a business. And this can show itself in many ways, but ultimately it hits the bottom line. We have low margins. We have margins that aren't aligned with the sector. We've got hidden waste across our processes, and ultimately we're not generating the profits that we should be generating. If I give you a little example, I worked with a client up in Macrofelt, a fit-out company. And again, back to the point I talked about with everyone having good intentions, and they did. But those good intentions didn't follow through to delivery, didn't follow through to success. So what did we do? We actually brought clarity to the key things that needed to be done, the key projects, the key areas that needed to be delivered. And then we drove accountability in that because we gave people ownership for each of these different areas. And then we drove governance because then we sat down every month and we monitored progress against that. And so therefore we did get success. And we can talk a little bit more about that later when we refer to some of the testimonials. So what do we do? Well, on the surface of it, we have what we call the Elevar alignment system. And within this system, there are a number of pillars that you can see. And this is purposely designed to look like a jigsaw where the different pieces fit together. That's done on purpose because these things don't sit in isolation. They all do interconnect and have an impact upon each other. I use this analogy, or I use this diagnostic. It can be used across an entire business. It can be used across a division. It can be used across a team, and it's all applicable. We're going to deep dive into this today, and we're going to look at what this means for your own business. But if we just look quickly, and we'll, as I say, we'll go into more detail on it later, but if we just look quickly at what we have within this. So we have the plan. Normally this would be referred to as strategy, but I tend to stay away from strategy as some people find that maybe slightly confusing. But do we have a plan? Because we need one that sets the direction for us. And do we have the people that will enable that plan for it to happen? There's a great statement by Zig Ziglar who says, you don't build a business, you build people. And then those people build the business. And this is so true. We can have great plans if we even have one, and if we don't have the people to deliver it, well, then that plan still won't come to a successful conclusion. And then we look at process. And within process, I also include systems. But do we have a clear process? Do we utilize the systems that we have in the business to their full extent? And it's about understanding how we're clever with our processes, how we touch something less. We go in with a mindset of how can we only touch something once. If we pass items across multiple people, multiple desks, we're generating waste and we're generating opportunities for errors. And finally, then we look at performance. Performance are the metrics, the measures. It's a little bit like having a sporting game, a football game, a rugby game, and no, having no score for the game. How will we know if we were winning or losing? And ultimately, that's what we need here within our ecosystem of the business. We need to make sure that we've got the right metrics that let us know if we're winning or losing. And again, these are about making sure that we have enough adequate metrics. I worked in a business, a co-op in the south of Ireland. It was a £400 million business. And it was probably the best example that I've ever seen where there was so many metrics. The expression that I say that they couldn't see the wood for the trees. There was too much information coming in for it to be digested, to actually understand what's this telling me? What do I need to do differently? I like to use this analogy, and you have to credit me for using AI to be able to generate it on my journey of continuous improvement. But I talk when I'm in training about my F1 analogy. So I used AI to try and pull a picture together on it. But ultimately, the seriousness of it is that when you think about the elements that we've talked about within the F1 pit analogy and how they're able to achieve what they do, how are they able to achieve the speed of the changeovers when the cars come in? And you think about the different pillars that we talked about, they have a very clear process with what they do. They know the steps and who has to follow what steps. The people that are part of that team, there's enough people, there's not too many, but there's every position on the team is with clear structure, and the people are within that structure. And those people that are in the structure have got the right skills. They're very clear in their roles. They know how to communicate with each other. And there's absolute trust within each other in what they do. And they all have a plan. There's a clear strategy that's set out at the beginning, and that complete race strategy is diluted down into the changeover plans that they need to have in place. Again, it's a good way of looking at and thinking how all of the pillars need to be in place for this to be effective and for them to be able to deliver the performance metrics that they need. So now it's time for you to do some work. If you get your pen and paper, please, and if you can attempt to draw out on your piece of paper a shape not unlike what I've shown you here in the middle. The important piece is that you've got the 5 points of the shape. You've got your plan, you've got your people, you've got your process, you've got your structure, and you've got your performance. And what we're going to do now is we're going to walk through this for your own business, and I'm going to ask you to score it, but I'm going to work with you across each of them individually whilst you do that. And again, our scoring is going to be 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest. So if you want to allow for space for that when you're drawing it out. Okay. And I'll give you a little second to get that done. Now, you may want to take a note of this as we move through. So the scoring that we're going to use sections across the scoring mechanism of 1 to 10. Let's say 1 to 3 is an area that is weak or it's unclear. Okay. Let's say 4 to 6 then is something that it exists, but it's not completely in place. It's partially there. We're not quite there yet. And then if we go to 7 or 8, then we're going to say it's strong. We've got clarity on it, but maybe it's just not embedded as well as it could be. And finally, then these are the areas where we say on the scoring of 9 to 10, where it's very clear, it's very scalable, it's completely understood, And really, there's no more that you can do within that space. Now, when I work with businesses and we do the deep dive and we do the work that we do, the term that I like to use is pockets of excellence. And within businesses, and I'm not going to be surprised if you find this within your own business, you will have pockets of excellence. I would expect that by the time we've walked through the 5 pillars, you'll find that there are areas that you are really good in. But equally, then, I wouldn't be surprised to find that there are areas that you're not so good in. And that's fine. But the lowest areas and the lowest scores are the indications of the places in the business that we then need to concentrate. And what we need to do here is that we can't take for granted those pockets of excellence that we do have in the business. What we need to do is we need to protect them. We need to make sure that they stay where they are, whilst we then divert time, attention, and resources into the other areas that we've identified that require more work and more effort. I left this in. It's a proverb. When I do strategy development with businesses, this is one of the proverbs or statements that I talk to businesses about, and it resonates with me, and I hope it resonates with you. But if we just look at what the statement is, which is that vision without action is a daydream, and action without a vision is a nightmare. And so if we break that down and we think about what that means within the businesses, and if I talk about it from my own first-hand experience, there's 2 sections to that. And this is what I see. And I'll go to the second element first of it, which is where action without vision is a nightmare. And that's too often what I find in businesses where there is constant action. There's lots of action, but are we actually being active all in the right way? Are we actively all pulling in the same direction? And too often the answer to that is not, no, we're not. And so that's what we need to look at. So step one, we're going to look at plan. So I want you to think about the plan or the strategy. I'm going to walk through some things to think about. Your goal here or your objective is to give yourself a score of 1 to 10, but let me walk through some points for you to consider or think about. So direction. Do you know where the business is going and what success looks like? Again, when I work with businesses, and I don't know why I keep coming up with this one, but I talk about going to Cork. If we were going to set off on a journey to Cork, we would start to build a plan. We would start to think about what route are we going to go? How long is that going to take? Will we stop off on the way? How long will we be there for? It's about thinking about this for your business. Where is it that we're trying to get to? And then within that, there are 2 points to consider. Current position. Where are we now? Where do we sit today? And where is our future ambition? And that is really important because the gap between those 2 points then tell us what is the work that we need to do. How do we bridge that gap to get us from where we are now to where we want to be? And what we do with that is then we turn that into priorities. We turn that into actually what do we need to do in the next 6 months? What do we need to do inside the next 12 months? And this, when we start bringing this to life, is where we can begin to link in the accountability. We can begin to link in the ownership within the business, and we can begin to linking in people moving in the right direction. And finally, decision making. And this is important because a plan will do 2 things. And ultimately, the positive is that it tells us where we want to go. But equally, the negative side of that is as important, which is it tells us what we don't want to do. And sometimes we struggle with knowing what is the right or wrong decision. But if we've got a very clear plan, it gives us absolute clarity on the things that we should do and the things then equally that we shouldn't do. So I want you to mark yourself again from that scoring of 1 to 10 of where you feel you are on the plan for your business. Moving on to structure. So we're going to look at the structure of the business. And again, I'm going to walk down some points for you to think about and consider before you come up with your final scoring. But financial clarity. Are the key areas of the business clearly defined? functional clarity, sorry, excuse me. Role clarity. Do people understand their role? Do they understand what their contribution is? Do they have clear objectives within that structure of what it is that they're meant to do? Are there clear reporting lines? Again, I know it's a simple piece, but lots of businesses that I've been in actually really they don't know who their line manager is, which is very insightful because that means then that they don't have any accountability where their objectives are reviewed together with their line manager to understand, are they adding value, are they delivering? And people see this as a negative, but it's not. It's a positive because people, human beings, want to know that they're adding value. They want to know that they're contributing in the main. And so it's a psychologically positive advancement to make to allow that conversation, which is my next point on communication. It allows the communication to move across the business. What we don't want are corridor conversations, and what we don't want is somebody's career being determined by a quick comment over a cup of coffee in the kitchen. And then thinking about the structure of the business, and if we've developed our plan, we need to think, will the structure of what we've got in our business allow us to deliver our plan? It may or may not. And finally, decision rights. Again, because we've got the structure, we should have clarity on where the decisions can be made within the business. So again, if you can finally pick your own score for your structure in the business. Now, we're moving into people. And I thought this is an interesting statistic that I use and I talk about. 85% of the problems, let's put it into your own world and think about the work. Think about the week that you had last week. 85% of the problems that you had last week were human related. When I talk to business owners about this, they generally laugh at me and say, no, it was probably closer to 100%, Philip. The reality of it is that we need to get the people dimension of our business right. So moving into people and thinking about the people in our organization, again, some areas to consider are, do we have the skills and the capabilities that we need? Do we have a skills matrix? Do we know what the skills are and do we know where we are against that? What are the behaviors in the business? What's the culture in the business? How do the behaviors contribute towards the success of what we're looking for in the business? Are there negative behaviors that need to be addressed? What's the leadership strength like? Does too much sit with the one owner? Do you remember we talked about the problems with ownership dependency? So what's the leadership strength? Do we need to train the leadership team? Ownership. Are people taking that ownership and accountability element that we talked about? Engagement. Are people clear and motivated on their expectations? Do they know their top 3 or 4 objectives that they need to deliver? And development gaps. Do we know now, because we've had a conversation, we know where we want to get to, we know where an individual is right now? Have we turned that into a development gap? Do we know the training and development that we need to do with them? So thinking about that, I want you to then quickly put your own score down for your own business on the people. Now, moving into process. Something to think about then within processes. So what are our core processes? Do we know what they are? Are they efficient? Do we have waste in them? I've seen time and time again, we roll yellow belt, Lean Six Sigma training, and part of that is a process where we do yellow belts with businesses. It's a 12-week mini project, and time again, when I see people coming back presenting the number of processes that they have identified, that they have reduced waste in. I work with a large corporate in the south of Ireland at the moment, and we've had one strategic project where they were looking at their forecasting effort, and when they mapped out their current ways of working, the number of departments that were involved in that end delivery process of what they were looking for, the number of individuals who were repeating work, compared to the future state that they've delivered, which is one department, one person, significant reduction in time, significant reduction in wasted time and effort. It's very effective. Consistency. Again, is the process dependent on the person, or is the process fixed so that any person can come in and do it? Will the process that you have scale? What if the volume that was running through that process doubled? Would it cope? And experience. And this is a dangerous one. Does the process sit within an experienced individual because they've been doing it for so long? If that individual left, would you be in trouble? And then that leads to our risk control. Are the processes documented? Have we cross training in place? Again, we want to make sure that we're considering the downsides, we're considering how to protect ourselves in this area. So, thinking about process for your business, again, just quickly put down your own score for what that might be. And finally, performance. We're going to talk about the measures of business health. What are the measures of business health? Do we know what they are? Because this is what gives us visibility of what's working in the business and what isn't. So let's have a little conversation about some things to consider. So what are the key measures? What are the most important numbers and are they clearly defined? Financial visibility. Do we understand our margin on our product, our products? Do we understand our margin on our customers? Do we understand and can we control our cash flow? Do we have operational visibility? Do we know operationally what is working, what isn't work? Where have we inefficiencies? And then do we review these? Metrics in themselves do nothing, but metrics combined with an appropriate review mechanism, that's where we begin to have an opportunity to drive change. Metrics are only there to guide us and inform us to allow us to make the decision. Do we have enough early warning signs in place? Are all of our metrics after the event, are they actually too late? There's no point somebody coming producing a set of financial metrics that's maybe 2 months out of date. It's too late at that stage for you to take corrective action. So we need to make sure that the metrics that we get are coming quick enough and accurately enough. And then finally, are they linked to the plan? Don't forget, keep that image in your head of the ecosystem and that circle where everything is interconnected, because we want to make sure that where our plan is guiding our direction and our direction is being measured. And we need to make sure that there's alignment. So again, thinking about that, score yourself on where you feel you are on performance. Now, having said that, you'll have a shape of sorts on your piece of paper. And what I want you to think about is what that shape might be telling you. So if your shape is 10, the whole way right around the outside, you're absolutely great and you do not need any help. However, if you have an uneven shape, which is quite often, if you remember, I talked about the pockets of excellence, this is going to show us then where the friction is going to come from. This is going to show us the areas that we need to protect and then the areas that we need to then look at developing. And if we look at some possible combinations, I'm going to pick two here of what may come out. I'm going to talk about the top right-hand side where we've got high process. So you've scored yourself high on the process pillar, but you've actually scored yourself low on the people pillar. What does that mean? Well, it means that potentially you've got systems, they do exist, but people run systems and processes are what sits within the systems. But do we have ownership and accountability? Do we have leadership in relation to that? It's starting to guide that there may be challenges in this place. So I would term that the chaos engine. And then the other one that I'll look at on the bottom is high structure and low performance. So we've got a clear structure, but our performance metrics are non-existent or weak. And this is where we have margin bleed. Maybe rules are unclear. Maybe the business lacks the measures needed to drive. Maybe clarity of role and ownership within it is missing. But ultimately, a weakness or a lower score in any of these pillars is what's going to cause friction. It's going to be what restricts the growth. I want you to think about your own score and what the lowest one was. What could be done? How do we fix that part of the engine so that we start making progress? So having said that, and now that we have it, what is the journey that we go on? Well, we do an audit. We understand where your business is today. And what we've walked through very quickly is a very high level audit. and an example of how we would then start to digest what's going on within your business. But from that audit, that gives us the insight. And from that insight, we define our priorities. And from those priorities, we build our action plan. And from that action plan, we get our executive execution rhythm. I talk about governance, and that provides us with our governance. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But ultimately, all of that brings us into an environment where we've got a greater success of sustainable growth. Now, this may seem a little bit strange that I have jumped straight into a little bit of theory of Lean Six Sigma. And if anybody has done any Lean Six Sigma training, you'll be very familiar with this. And we've probably all have heard the expression, the five whys. Ask why 5 times to get to the root cause. But ultimately that came from this gentleman, Toyota, in the 1930s, and part of the development of TPM and Lean, which combined and became Lean Six Sigma. Anyway, 5 whys. I want to talk about this quickly, and then I'll explain why. But the 5 whys in reality, if we think about it, the problem, the symptom that we're looking at the beginning here on this example is that we ran through a red light. So we begin asking why. Well, why did we run through the red light? Because we were late for work. Well, why were we late for work? Well, because we woke up late. Well, why did we wake up late? Because the alarm didn't work. Well, why did the alarm not work? Because the battery was dead. Well, why was the battery dead? Because I forgot to check it. So actually, we've now got to the root cause. So whilst we look at that from a business perspective, sorry, your pictures are over this. 1 second. So if we look at this from a business perspective, let's say the symptom is that margin targets are missed. Okay, so we begin asking the 5 whys and we start digging down into this. So why was that? Well, because there were delays in production. Okay, so why were there delays in production? Well, because materials were unavailable. Okay, so why were materials unavailable? Because there was poor inventory visibility. Okay, well, why was there poor inventory visibility? Is because our systems were not up to speed. Our information in our systems wasn't accurate. So the root cause of margin targets being missed in this case is the fact that we need to look at the use of the systems that we have in our business and the accuracy of the data within those systems. And so this is an important concept to understand, because when we go into businesses, and I see this time and time again, when we look and we talk about the symptoms, that we don't want to be dealing with and fixing the symptoms. We want to be identifying and fixing the root cause. So some examples. We done some work 2 or 3 years ago with a large dairy co-op. Turnover of this business was 400 million plus. What was the challenge within there? Again, bearing in mind and thinking about the ecosystem that we talked about, the challenge in here was the leadership. The challenge in here was the people. We talked earlier about performance metrics. This was a business that had so many metrics, they were drowning in information. The challenge was actually the coordination of that. It was a fragmented team. They didn't get together, they didn't talk, and if they did talk, at best it was passing in the corridor. So what did we do? We brought in some leadership development training. We brought in some alignment on the leadership team. We brought in some governance rules of when we would meet, how we would meet, what we would talk about within those environments. We identified the priorities for the business, and we wrapped those priorities up inside Lean Six Sigma projects, and we gave accountability of that to the teams that ran those projects. What was the result? The result was over 3 million actually at that stage in savings that we were able to roll out within that business. And again, it's not any one thing. It's that ecosystem that we've talked about working effectively. If I move on then, and I talked about the joinery business in Macrofelt, again, that was another business where we went in and we done leadership training, we done strategy development, but ultimately with that accountability, what we were able to deliver was 3.4 million in savings. Another company that we worked with was Grove, and within Grove, we also went in, we worked with them. We developed strategy, we developed an alignment of the priorities, and we wrapped all of those priorities up inside strategic projects that we gave ownership to different pockets and teams within the business. And that generated almost nearly 5 million in savings. And then finally, or not finally, but on this example, Gita, a construction company where we done work with and we done leadership development training. We implemented a new tier. If we remember, we talked about structure. We actually, after our review, realized that the structure needed modification, and we added a new tier, management tier, in there at an associate director level, and that was to allow for succession planning, which actually now has come to prove its worth, as there were originally 6 associate directors that we put in play, and 3 of those have now moved to the director level. So we've been able to complete that succession planning. We developed strategy development, and we stay with them even today, helping implement that strategy within the business. Again, some examples here. Leadership development program with Causeway Coast and Glens, and you can see the message from David Jackson that we worked with. So we worked with that team for 12 months. And again, I'll jump to the right hand side, and where we've got Rosie and Jim. If anybody knows them, fantastic products, gluten free. But we worked with Jimmy and the team, and again, we commenced that work with that business as a diagnostic, and that diagnostic identified an area of weakness like we've done today. And then we concentrated purely within that area of weakness. And we ultimately, as a result of that, were able to help that business drive in 1.5 million of price increases. And finally, my last example is Greenview. So we actually worked with the venture capitalist company that owned this business, and this was an interesting case study. The company was 36 million in revenue of size. The challenge, as it was thought, was it was a cash flow pressure. And when we went in and done our diagnostic, the reality was that the growth the business was going through was causing friction within the different departments within the business, which meant that they had lost visibility of margin. They had lost visibility of control on costs. And so cash flow wasn't the problem. It was actually clear control and clear performance visibility to make the difference within that business. So how do we solve it? So the approach that we take within Elevar is important for me to talk about to begin with. Partnership is a word that I have on this page because the work that we do with Elevar is, and I don't like the word consultancy, unfortunately, that's the space that I'm in, but I prefer the word partnership because the work that I do with businesses is where I actually become a partner with that business. And as we talk about, as we move through a little bit, we become ingrained with the success that the business, we want the business to be as successful as the business owner wants it to be at the same time. And so therefore that methodology of partnership is very strong with us. And equally, the advice, the guidance, the approaches that I'm talking to you today about, they're from 2 angles. I've got almost 30 years of corporate experience, but I've also got my education and my training. And what I do is I'm able to put both of those together. I'm able to understand what works and what doesn't. And so I use elements of Lean Six Sigma that I'm trained in. I'm using elements of project management that I'm trained in. I'm using elements of accountancy training that I have. I use all of those, and I'm able to understand from my own experience firsthand what works and what doesn't. So this is the framework that we work through with businesses, and it's a 6-step process. Now, the diagnostic is step 1. Now, within that diagnostic, which takes place over roughly 9 days, it's dependent on the size of the business. Within that, we have 11 sub-steps of what we look at within the business. We then move from that into developing the strategy for the business. And we then move into developing the leadership. Remember, we talked at the beginning, and it's so true. If we don't have the people in place to deliver the plan will not be successful. And that's why this is very important that we have a leadership pillar and we train and get the capability there. We have a financial pillar, or if you want to think about it in relation to the ecosystem, the performance metrics. Have we got visibility, clarity on the performance metrics? And we do the work around that to make sure that it's there. And then we look at process and systems optimizations. We've talked about that to date, and that's a key pillar that we lean into. And then pillar six, and finally pillar six is our governance. And that's where we make sure that the firefighting doesn't take over, and we come in and we hold the hands of the business owners and the leaders, and we make sure that the accountability is there, that the progress is there. How many times, and I know I certainly was guilty of it, that we start things with really good intentions and then they drift off. This governance is the bit that helps it stick. So what does it do? Well, it delivers the opposite of any of the negatives that we've talked about. We see increased performance and savings. We do see increased accountability and improvement in leadership teams. We do see projects, if they have existed, we see that they're delivered. Or we even see that the projects are identified to begin with. And we see a stronger culture and a stronger improvement in staff retention. We see people who are happier because they've got that understanding of the difference that they're making. So what does it mean? So the return on investment that we've done to date, and this is a little bit like the stock market, the past performance is what I'm going to talk about, but the past performance of the work that we've done, and I hope you can see that from the case studies that we've spoken about, but the rate of return is 4-1. The performance growth is anywhere around 15%, and the savings have been generally over $1 million. Again, obviously that's dependent on the size of the business, but I'm very comfortable and very confident that with the work that we've done, that we do will and can achieve a return of 4-1 on the investment that it takes to roll the framework out. So what are the next steps? How do we work from here? Well, we can begin with the 30-minute call. We can have a chat one-to-one about the results that you've got, and we can talk about what that might mean. And we can dive into that a little bit further, and that's a free, no obligation call. Moving from there, we would be moving into step one, the business diagnostic. Now that business diagnostic costs about 10,000. Again, it depends on the size of the business, but approximately costs 10,000. Anybody interested that has attended the webinar, we're going to run a discount of 10% to webinar attendees. So we can have a conversation about that within our 30-minute call. Now, what we do from there is that we move into a go, no-go decision. So you can imagine the framework, we've 6 steps. The diagnostic is step 1. This go, no-go decision is something for both parties. This allows us to understand if we can add the value within that business before we progress any further. And it allows the business to understand if there's value to be had in making the continued investment. And that's an opportunity for both parties to decide. And then we move forward, if there is a go decision, into the business framework. Now, the question you need to ask is, are we ready for making a £10,000 investment? And really, the other way of looking at it is, can you afford not to? What's the cost of that misalignment for another year? So think about where the areas of weakness are in your business, and let's have a conversation about how we might help with that. And that's us finished. Thank you, everybody. It was lovely to see you today. I have activated your microphones. I appreciate our time is up. However, if anybody has any questions, please feel free. All good. Okay.
Just a quick one for you, Philip. Nathan
Yes,
here
Nathan.
from Gravis. One of the things I suppose that we recognize is, as a business owner, we can't do everything. And as you talked about there, ownership is important, and delegating is critical. So I suppose my question is, and I know this is a very vague question because there's a few different answers, but in your experience, is there one kind of best way to motivate somebody to take full ownership of the tasks we delegate them? And this comes from an area where I'll be taking over the business in the next couple of years. I can't do everything.
Yep.
There's a couple of key people within our business, but I know for a fact that I can't get them fully on board unless I can motivate them the right way. So yeah.
Yep. I would begin, Nathan, talking about norms, culture. The culture in the business is driven by the norms, the normalities. I'll give you a funny little example of it. There's the construction company that I talk about working in as a case study, Gita. The one business that I walk into that, this may not mean anything to you, Nathan, because you're from the south, but in the north there's a great loaf called Nutty Crust. And one of the norms in Gita is the continual smell of nutty crust in the amount of toast that is done at 11 o'clock in the place. This drives, whilst it's an antidote, it's a norm within the business. And to get the motivation, it's back to getting the right culture. It's getting the right drive. When I talked about assigning the roles and responsibilities to individuals, they need to be there. People need to know what it is that they're working towards. People need to know and can see that they're making a difference. Psychologically, when you can identify that, you get buy-in. People want to know that they're making a difference. And so therefore it's about being able to show that and having those strong conversations. I keep making analogies between professional sports. I played rugby for a lifetime. Unfortunately, I can't say I ever got to the professional stage, but I love that analogy between professional sports and business. We are very willing and able within a sporting environment to give feedback. We talk about a feedback loop within the sporting environment. Straight after our game on a Saturday or a Sunday, there's constant feedback about what worked and what didn't. Why can we not have the same conversations within business? We can, but we don't. And if we can activate those types of feedback loops within business, we start to get more engaged and motivated people.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Nothing else? Okay. Well, listen, thank you everybody for taking the time to attend. I look forward to hearing from you all. You've got my contact details, so please do reach out if you'd like to have another conversation on a one-to-one basis. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers,
Bye.
Philip.
Bye. Bye.